Good morning. Thank you very much to stay here with us. And we have little time, and so I give the word Bianca Galoro to present you, the Felixx studio, and your work. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the third seminar of this edition of the Resilient City Seminar. This is a cycle of seminars coordinated by Professor Macaione at the University of Basilicata within the research activities of NatureCityLAB. Once again, thank you to our Professor Macaione for reserving some time and space for this external contribution. I'm Bianca Galoro, for those who don't know me, the students I think quite well. I'm an architect in PhD and a postdoc researcher between University of Basilicata and Zoud University of Applied Science in Dutch Limburg. I am part of this cycle of seminars together with my colleague Alessandro Raffa, who is going to join very soon, and the support of the Secretariat by Enrica Consiglio, who is virtually here but cannot attend, unfortunately. Well, today we have the pleasure and the honor to host the studio Felixx, landscape architects and planners, who will tell us about a new space, the Happy Street Guide, building up on the design experience of Groningen, or at least starting from that. I would like to briefly introduce our guests, Emanuela Cammarata, architect and business developer, and Elan Redekop van der Meulen, sorry if I pronounce it not right, associate partner and landscape architect. So Emanuela is an architect with a solid education and natural inclination for strategic communication. She graduated with honors in architecture from the University of Palermo. She chose to delve into the link between design and storytelling, obtaining a scholarship for the advanced training course in marketing and communication for architecture at the IAC Academy in Bologna in 2021. At Felixx, she contributes to the development of the office by supporting visibility, the launch of new collaboration, and strategic positioning on the international market, thanks to an approach that combines creativity, method, and vision. While Elan is a landscape architect who graduated from Delft University of Technology in 2017. After graduation, he joined Felixx, embarking on a significant professional development path. Since 2018, he has held a central role within the project research team, contributing to numerous projects dedicated to climate change, biodiversity, and water management. His rapid professional development led him to be appointed associate in 2023 in recognition of his deep technical expertise and leadership skills. His contribution to projects such as those for Almere, Groningen, and Leuven highlight his ability to apply innovative, climate-adapted strategies that address environmental challenges while enhancing the resilience and well-being of the communities involved. So thank you very much to our guests, Emanuela and Elan. Also, Alessandro Raffa joined, who, as I said before, organized these events with me. So I'll ask the students to prepare some questions, and then maybe we can engage a Q&A session of 10 minutes at the end of your lecture. And for those who maybe don't want to ask by person, you can also write it in the chat, and we can take care of them. And there could be a couple of other people joining online, so maybe we're going to have some other contribution. But for now, thank you very much for being here, for giving you us your time. And yeah, I'll leave you the floor.
Ok, buongiorno, io farò la mia introduzione in italiano e poi lascerò la parola ad Elan che parlerà in maniera più approfondita del nostro progetto a Groningen. Grazie Bianca per l'introduzione. Farò una brevissima introduzione dello studio Felixx di paesaggio. È uno studio che è stato fondato in Olanda nel 2014, quindi ormai abbiamo una storia decennale nel campo del paesaggio e abbiamo progetti soprattutto in Olanda ma anche a livello internazionale. È uno studio molto giovane di all'incirca 30 professionisti. Abbiamo un team multidisciplinare che va da esperti di paesaggio, biologi, esperti di ecologia, di progetto dello spazio pubblico. È un team disciplinare formato, organizzato in questo modo, ci ha permesso in qualche modo di spostarci da quello che è la disciplina del paesaggio intesa in maniera tradizionale in Olanda, quindi delle grandi infrastrutture, a uno studio, un progetto del paesaggio più orientato a un dialogo con la natura. Un approccio che ci ha portato a diventare degli esperti nel campo delle MBS, quindi delle soluzioni basate sulla natura. Infatti la World Bank ci ha commissionato il catalogo delle Nature-Based Solution per la resilienza urbana, che in qualche modo ad oggi rappresenta un po' la guida per tutti i progettisti che si approcciano allo studio e all'applicazione delle MBS. Quindi Felixx è uno studio che si occupa di ricerca, come nel caso dello studio per una città salutare a piedi, che quindi analizza un modello di città con una mobilità diversa, basata appunto su una città, per così dire, passeggiata. Abbiamo anche un grande portfolio di progetti che si concentrano sull'applicazione di policy e di strategie, per esempio nel caso di Groningen, che vedremo in maniera più approfondita oggi, ma anche nel caso di Almere. Quindi il comune di Almere ha commissionato a Felixx e Posad Maxson recentemente uno studio per lo sviluppo della città di Almere come una città basata sulle soluzioni basate sulla natura, scusate il gioco di parole, che appunto nel 2040, secondo questo sviluppo, sarà la prima città in Olanda organizzata secondo il modello MBS. Realizziamo ovviamente anche progetti, e in questa foto potete vedere 2 progetti di parchi, ma diversi tra loro. Il parco di Reinfliet, che è un parco edibile in un contesto residenziale, e il Park Sommerlust, che è invece un parco fluviale in una ex zona industriale di Amsterdam, che riconnette la città al fiume Amstel. E adesso lascerei la parola ad Elan, non so se vuole aggiungere qualcosa rispetto allo studio, al nostro portfolio, per poi andare al progetto di Groningen.
Okay. Well, thank you for the invitation to tell a bit about Groningen. I would like to start off first a bit to explain the context of Groningen, because I can imagine that most of you are not very familiar with Groningen. So Groningen is all the way in the north of the Netherlands. So we are located with our office in Rotterdam. So it's about a 3-hour drive from Rotterdam to Groningen. And the city of Groningen has approximately 200,000 inhabitants and has a very medieval historic city center. And originally this historic city center was completely filled with car traffic. However, quite early in the urban development of Groningen, they made a conscious decision to make a traffic circulation plan. And that was quite revolutionary for its time. It was one of the first cities in Europe to have done that, where they actively restricted the car traffic that could go through the historic city center. So this was also quite important for kind of the mind state of most of the inhabitants of Groningen, that they're already very focused on the on cycling instead of using their cars, which allows much more in public space. But I'll get back to that in a bit. In 2020, the coalition, the mayor made an active decision to go even further than the traffic circulation plan, and had the statement that parking in front of your door is no longer automatically possible. So they wanted to re-win the public space from parked cars and also parked bikes. And for this re-winning of public space, we took two documents that were kind of the basis of our perspective. One is a study we did for the Dutch government, which is towards a healthy city on foot. And one is a book that was written by one of the professors of the University of Amsterdam, which is called The Right of the Fastest. And both of these actually argue that we should rethink our public space and make mobility less dominant. And Marco, the professor, he had a specific metaphor for this perspective, and that is the metaphor of the primeval forest, the old growth forest, because an old growth forest is a very diverse ecosystem where different plant and animal species live together. And in this ecosystem, all facets of animals' life are able to be placed there. So it's a place where animals can hunt, where they can forage, where animals can play, they can grow. And regardless of where this primeval forest is in the world, it always managed to find this dynamic balance that allows these organisms to live. However, in human history, we started to also understand this forest in a different way. We started to understand the potential of timber, the kind of building material that this wood would give humans. And we also started to rethink how we could organize this forest in a different way. And this is the result. It's a production forest where humans can grow wood very quickly and efficiently, much more efficiently than a primeval forest. However, if we make the comparison between this primeval forest and this production forest, we also see that a lot of these other aspects of this primeval forest are completely lost in a production forest. So even though it's really good for one focus, it's really bad for all others. And actually that same dynamic we can see in public space, where originally our public spaces were the spaces between the facades of buildings, and it was a place where people could trade their goods. It was a place for children to play. It was a place for people to meet each other. And it was also a place to move from one point to another. However, with the introduction of the car, we were able to move much faster from point A to point B. And we also started to rethink our public spaces in a very different way, on how we could organize those public spaces to let these cars drive even faster from point A to point B. And as a result, we get kind of a production street that doesn't have other facets that were originally there in public space. So it actually became only mobility and hardly anything else. So if we compare these two, they're not equal to each other. So our main aim with the guidebook that we made was to rebalance public space, to not have only a mobility-focused public space, but to actively rename these other facets, these other aspects of our public spaces. So these are the 10 dimensions we named as kind of ambitions for public spaces that they should be able to maintain. The first being that the street is for everyone, so that we have an inclusive public space. The second, that the street is safe, so not only traffic safety, but also social safety. That the street creates an experience, that it is a pleasant experience when we move through public spaces. That the street is a healthy environment. That the street stimulates social interaction. That the street has a balanced mobility, because mobility is still an important part of our lives, so we also don't want to get completely rid of it. That the street is an ecosystem. that the street is climate adaptive, that the street creates value, so for the surrounding real estate, but also for shops, that they can make use of these public spaces. And the last one, that the street has an identity. And this is actually the most important one of all, because public spaces that have an identity allow for people to feel connected to these public spaces. And in a way, it is also kind of the result of the other 9 ambitions together. So our main aim is to not have an infrastructural focused public space, but that we actively look at what are the synergies between these different ambitions and how we can bring them together in a dynamic balance. And that could look something like this, where water management, social interaction, mobility, climate adaptation, biodiversity all comes together in one space. And to do this in a proper way, we also have to rethink the way we look at our urban areas. So originally in planning, we often start with the larger scale, and then we make certain decisions that are implemented or proposed onto the neighborhood and street level. However, if we really want to make this human experience the most important thing, then we also have to flip it around, that we have to start at the scale of the human experience, which is the street level. So we work first from the street level and then look at what are the consequences on the larger scales. So starting with the street, we looked at all streets in Groningen and organized them into 14 street typologies. And these 14 street typologies, they're representative of all streets in the municipality. And for each of these streets, we made an analysis of the current situation. We made a design for the short term, but we also wanted to make a design for the long term. That is not something that we can realize within the first 20 years, but we have to know what is the dot on the horizon that we want to move towards, that we don't make any decisions on the short term that prevent us from realizing that dot on the horizon. And for each of these situations, we also made spider diagrams to look at how are these 10 dimensions rebalanced. So we see in the current situation, mobility is much more dominant than all the other dimensions. And in the short term and long term, this balance is shifting completely. And another thing we notice is that the sum of the different dimensions is not always the same, because you can use the same space to create a good place for biodiversity and climate and social interaction and health at the same time, whereas mobility is often very limited in how it can be addressing other dimensions as well. So this is one of the street typologies. This is one of the main traffic arteries into the city center. And as we see 5 lanes of asphalt in the middle, but also on either side, we have side streets that connect to the housing, where also there are a lot of parked cars and a lot of paving. So in the bars below, we see kind of what this balance are, which parts of the section address which dimension, and we see that mobility is very well represented. However, on the short term, we are able to make the lanes in the middle of the street profile much smaller and limit them to 2 lanes, and rethink how we organize these 2 side streets to make them much more shared spaces, also for pedestrians and cyclists, rather than only for the car. And this reorganization allows us to make much more green space in the profile, where kids can play, but also water can be buffered. However, on the long term, we would even like to go further. Maybe we can even think of this street profile as a park from facade to facade, where even these side streets are no longer necessary, and that this central road meanders through the street like a parkway. And that allows us to create much more places for biodiversity, also for children to play, and really the ambitions that we want for our future. This is another street profile that we investigated. This is a shopping mall on the right and a residential area towards the left where a lot of elderly people live. However, this street profile is forming a huge barrier for elderly people that aren't as mobile. So reducing this barrier effect was one of the main aims of this street profile. So what we said is, what if we limit the car space to 2 lanes and make the materialization of it in such a way that it allows much more for crossing people, and the space that we won, we turn it into a pleasant social space with enough tree canopies to create a pleasant climate also in summer, and maybe water features that also improve the climate. And the final street typology I want to show is the one of a suburban area. This is a very typical profile of a suburban area in Holland. As you can see, it's completely filled with parked cars. However, if we organize the parked cars more efficiently, we can win space that at the front of these houses, we can create a much more of a community space where the different neighbors can get together and have maybe neighborhood barbecues or events together to create also a much more connected social environment. But on the long term, maybe we even want to go further, that we want to use this central space also to produce its own food and energy, that it can become a self-reliant neighborhood. With the different lessons that we learned on a street level, we also looked at one scale up. What happens if we bring these streets together in different neighborhoods? Also here, we looked at different typologies of neighborhoods. These are 6 typical urban fabrics that we find in the Netherlands. So one is a pre-war urban area, one is a post-war urban area, one a suburban area. We have a historic village center and an industrial area, and also a very recent expansion area. And each of these urban fabrics, they also have different street typologies, but they also require different measures on how to create a robust framework for the neighborhood. To understand what is happening in these neighborhoods, we organized together with the municipality and inhabitants neighborhood walks. This was also during COVID, so as you can see, we were all having a 1.5 meter distance from each other. And we walked through the neighborhood and started to evaluate their environment. So it was for us to understand how they see their public space, but we also used the opportunity to try and inspire them into seeing their neighborhood in a different way, and at least the potential that their neighborhood has. And as a result, we created networks of the current situation and also proposed alternative organizations based on the street profiles and the lessons from the street profiles that we had gathered. And these 10 dimensions, we grouped them into 4 main topics. And for each of these topics, we made a strategic framework. The first strategic framework is the green-blue framework, which is a combination of the ecological dimension and the climate adaptive dimension. And for each of these strategic frameworks, we looked at how we can maximize this framework to create a robust structure. So each theme had its own robust structure. Same for the mobility framework, which is mobility, safety, and inclusivity. The social framework, which is health, social interaction, and economy. And the experiential framework, which is experience and identity. And while looking at each layer independently and trying to maximize the possibilities per topic, we then stack them on top of each other, and the result is an alternative organization of the neighborhood. So we did that for all of the different urban tissues of the typologies of urban fabric. But these street typologies and these neighborhoods, they are not the most iconic places in the city. They're really representative for all places in the city, but not the icons that people feel most attracted to. So we looked at 3 specific spots that are very iconic for the city of Groningen. And I'll highlight one of them, which is the station square, the main station square of the city. As we can see here, there's a historic station building, but over the years it got completely disconnected from the water because there was a structure built in between for bike parking, and a lot of car traffic was added. So there is kind of this disconnect between the train station and the historic water line. And this historic water line is part of the ring structure that is the border of the historic city center. So it's actually a point where these 2 important networks come together. However, in public space, you don't notice that at all. So our ambition was to greenify this station square to reconnect the station building with the water. And also here we try to implement all of these dimensions in a good way and balance them together. And the result is maybe the greenest station square of the Netherlands, which could look something like this, which is a very different experience from the current situation. So that was the 3 steps that we did for the guidebook. And kind of the main point of this guidebook is that it is a guide for a different type of design process. So it's not a handbook that says that sidewalks need to be a certain dimension, or that roads need to be in a certain material. It is much more an invitation for all of these other facets of our living environments to be looked at the same time. So it's an inspiration document. And a good example of that is actually what happened after we finalized the guidebook and the municipality had made it public. There was one neighborhood in Groningen that took the guidebook, took ownership of the guidebook, and went to the municipality and said, we want this for our public spaces, and specifically for the 4 squares in their neighborhood. So they asked the municipality to work together with us. So the 3 parties, so the neighborhood inhabitants, the municipality, and us as designers, we worked together to make a strategy for their neighborhood. And also here we made neighborhood walks to understand what is happening in the neighborhood. We made thematic frameworks to understand what we ideally would want per topic, and created an alternative organization. And then we looked specifically at the 4 squares in the neighborhood that they wanted to focus on. And we had workshops with the inhabitants and created a blank spider diagram where we gave the inhabitants 50 points that they could attribute to these 10 dimensions, so that they were kind of forced to make difficult decisions. Because if you give 10 points to health, that also means that you have less points to spend, for example, on mobility or on biodiversity. So we asked them to make that distinction for the 4 squares. So for the first square, they selected these reference projects. We printed out some reference projects and asked them which atmosphere they thought would fit best with what they have had imagined for the square. And they divided the points over the 10 dimensions. And what you see here is that for this square, they found identity the most important, but also social interaction and biodiversity. They found economy not important at all, and mobility not important at all. So that was also an interesting result. And what we were originally kind of scared of was that all spider diagrams for all the 4 squares would look exactly the same. However, for the second square, they chose these references, so very different references that are much more paved, but also have much more social interaction. And they made this spider diagram. So here, biodiversity was much less important to them, but social interaction and experience and climate adaptation were the most important aspects. So in a way, the 4 spider diagrams for the 4 squares looked radically different. And with that spider diagram, we made together with them a design for their square, which eventually would look something like that. And half a year later, they realized it. And this is the result that there is now. I think this is quite a nice example of how inhabitants take ownership of the document that was originally made by the municipality and really embody this rethinking of public space. And I think it's quite impressive to see what the results can become.
Thank you very much. It was a very inspiring lecture. So, yes, thank you again. Maybe are there some questions, or we can make some consideration? I think you gave us really a lot to think about.
Grazie mille. Ciao.
No problem.
I ask someone.
Yes, if we have some comments.
The student at the moment are working about a seascape, and they applied your guide, and so I hope they have a question. Now is Alessandro Raffa, if you want.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you. And to Elan and Emanuela. And like many here, I truly appreciate the contribution of Felixx to contemporary design research on nature and the built environment. As Bianca said today, the lecture has been very inspiring. But I have a question that could sound theoretical, but I think has very practical implication. So given that the nature is a cultural construct shaped and reshaped to the evolving fabric of the city, how does Felixx integrate the cultural dimension of nature into the design process? Thank you.
Well, in a way, as landscape architects, we have no value in the purity of nature. We try to make nature. So in a sense, that's a very cultural version of nature. one of the other research lines in our office is the nature-based solutions studies. And what nature-based solutions say is that we should make use of the power of nature rather than to make a clean split between nature and our cultural landscapes. So even in the most cultural living environments like cities, nature can still play a proactive role, but we need to kind of work together with it in a very proactive and pragmatic way. I think as a Dutch person, my view on nature is very different because we don't have any real natural environments. Everything is man-made in a way, but I think there are some really great examples of how humans have worked together with nature to create more of a symbiosis.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I can build on this. See that we have a little bit of time, more than I expected. So I think we can try to make a resume. Oh, there is also Professor Pitakuda. Maybe, yeah, you can go.
Okay, thank you, Bianca. Thank you, Felixx, as a group for this presentation. Very interesting. And when I was listening, I've a couple of things that we were to expanding on, or maybe like just to point out for I think students will benefit from. I think one is the role of the street, because I think the street and the network of street is what really permeate the city and bring everything together. It is a place of public realm where everyone could share, and probably is the place where a city could be resilient in adapting nature. So I think that would be something that should be very clear. Why the street? Because it's not a square, it's not a pointing, it's not a park. It's really when the nature could really interact with the city more, with the community more. And I think that element is important, and I think it was key in the presentation, understanding it. And the second thing is about the consultation with the community, where you give them the spiral diagram of 20 points with a lot of points. Don't you feel that maybe, well, don't you feel, let's say, how do you feel they react to that? It was too complex for them understanding it, or it was quite natural how they interact? Because sometimes we have ideas as scholars, and our ideas sometimes needs to be shrink down, make it simple for them to understand. So my point was this one. One was about the street, which was more than a point, is highlighting the importance of the street as the place for this kind of operation. And the second one is how the community react to these.
Yeah, so maybe to answer your first question, it was a deliberate choice to focus on streets, because streets are the places where our daily lives take place. Squares and parks are more certain moments in our lives, but the streets are really connected to our daily lives. So if you can organize good public space in these spaces, then the impact is much bigger than having a really good park. So that's why for this city scale study, we deliberately chose to focus on streets instead of moments. And then for the second question, that is a really good point you make. That is also a bit kind of the nuance of this guidebook, that first of all, Groningen already politically, but also culturally made it much more possible to make more radical design choices, because they already at such an early stage made the pivot towards cyclists rather than cars. So that creates already quite a more easy base to propose these type of design choices. And then the second thing is that the Schildersbuurt, so the inhabitants that kind of initiated that project, they are also quite a specific neighborhood in Groningen. There's a lot of university people in that neighborhood that live there. So they're well educated. I think for these type of dynamics with inhabitants, you really have to understand who your audience is. And I think in this case, it worked really well to also make it slightly more abstract. I think we're now working in a different neighborhood, which is a low-income neighborhood and not as well educated generally. There we have to find different mediums to have this discussion with people. And there we are making a pilot project that we are actually testing out certain setups of public space and kind of building it for real, that people can also experience it, because then it's a much more intuitive way of making decisions on what works and what does not. So it's really important to understand your audience, to understand also the demographics of your context, to be able to make this process. And actually it's quite kind of a difficult conclusion to make for such a guidebook, is that actually you can never fix any of your rules or methodology. It's always very context specific. But in a way, it also means something for us as designers, that our role in our urban environments is super important, because we are the mediators between our environment and the different experts.
Thank you. It's very interesting. It's different audience, different approach, and keep experimenting. Thank you.
Thank you, Luigi. I think there is some question from students.
Yes, there is.
Parlo in italiano, soprattutto perché anche ho una domanda per Emanuela, dove ho letto che lei ha studiato comunque e ha fatto una tesi sulla narrazione di come può valorizzare un progetto. Quindi la mia domanda è come quindi questo suo studio ha aiutato lo studio Felixx. Una seconda domanda è come anche avviene la progettazione, come avviene il flusso di progettazione all'interno dello studio Felixx. Quindi una domanda un po' più personale e una invece più sul team, di come funziona e di come diciamo, come si muove nella fase di progetto.
Ok. Provo a rispondere alla domanda brevemente. Io ho iniziato la collaborazione con Felixx l'anno scorso a maggio, quindi lavoro in questo studio da all'incirca un anno. Penso che all'interno dello studio Felixx è davvero molto importante, come diceva Elan, il tema partecipativo. E quindi in qualche modo la comunicazione, lo storytelling dei progetti diventa fondamentale per cercare di modulare in qualche modo la narrazione, la descrizione dei progetti per diversi target, diversi tipi di audience e anche diversi tipi di progetti. Quello che ho fatto in particolar modo negli ultimi mesi all'interno dello studio è stato ad esempio la riformulazione di alcuni temi progettuali per lo scopo partecipativo. Ad esempio penso al caso di un serious game che abbiamo realizzato per la Stockholm World Water Week, dove abbiamo preso il progetto per Water as Leverage Cartagena, che è un progetto che viene promosso dal governo olandese in Colombia, dove c'è un forte accento sul processo partecipativo. E quindi durante la Stockholm World Water Week abbiamo realizzato insieme anche a una società ingegneristica Vitevene Bosch questo gioco e quindi il progetto di Cartagena è stato scomposto per poi riformularlo per mettere la comunità e il dialogo al centro in modo diverso. Non so se in qualche modo ho risposto alla tua domanda con questo esempio. E poi la seconda domanda era come lavoriamo sui progetti. Allora, abbiamo all'interno dello studio abbiamo diversi gruppi di progettazione. Ci sono dei gruppi che sono più concentrati sul technical design, gruppi di ricerca, un gruppo che si occupa dei concorsi. E non so se Elan può aggiungere qualcosa in più. So, how we develop the design process into the office. I was saying that we have different teams. So we have the technical design team, but also the research team. Yeah. Because I don't work on a daily basis with all of those teams. So
yeah, so the original idea is that we work on the full bandwidth of our discipline, and that we are also able to kind of translate the research and realize it. So we often like to kind of develop the steps all the way. So one example is this research we did for the government, which eventually translated into policy. And then after that, we worked on different development areas in Groningen, and we also realized them. So that is kind of an example of how we like to work, that we don't fly in with research and then get out. We also want to see kind of the impact realized, but we also want to kind of make the best impact possible by also rethinking this research part of our work. Is that kind of an answer to the question, or?
I also.
I think so.
And also I think I want to mention that if you are interested in our research on, for instance, discover more about the serious game, we recently had a section on our website called Knowledge. So it's possible to download, for instance, the PDF of the MBS catalog, the Groningen study, also the study for Almere, discover more about the serious game. So we are really trying to open our, let's say, research lab to a wider audience and to continue the discussion about MBS, biodiversity, and etc.
Yeah, thank you. I think this would definitely add up to the material of the class.
Yes. There is another question.
Thank you.
La mia domanda è se c'è mai stato un contesto urbano in Italia dove vi piacerebbe intervenire.
So, non abbiamo mai lavorato in un contesto urbano specifico in Italia. Sicuramente credo che quest'anno probabilmente stiamo cercando un po' di utilizzare un filone narrativo, per così dire, che riguarda le alluvioni, quindi forse un contesto che ci interessa, non un contesto urbano, una scala più ampia che ci interessa è quello dell'Emilia Romagna per le recenti alluvioni. So the question is if we have area in Italy that we are particularly interested in to work on.
Not particularly. I think I would personally really like to do a project in Italy, but not any zone in particular. But I think generally, considering we're moving or focusing a lot on nature-based solutions, I think focusing on the river systems is quite an urgent matter. And I think that would be kind of a logical area that we, with kind of the Dutch civil engineering knowledge, we could contribute into the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a question now. How much is important the relationship with government or municipality? I think is very, very important. In fact, in Italy difficult to work city hall or government?
Oh. The automatic lights. Yeah, so what we try to do is we try to work more like collaborations with municipalities. So, for example, in Groningen, with this Leidraad, we created quite a close collaboration that we also create kind of mutual trust. And that eventually translated into one of our colleagues who became stadsbouwmeester. Wouldn't know how to translate that, but
it's like city architect.
City architect, which is quite odd for a landscape architect to become city architect for a city. But that also shows kind of the trust that they have in us as an office. So I think it's also quite a Dutch working culture that it is more egalitarian, and also kind of the dynamics between client and office is much more collaboratory rather than top down.
In fact, I was in Groningen 10 years ago, where when the city hall began the process regenerative, and so it's a very, very interesting. I hope to go to Groningen very soon with Bianca, Luigi, and the students, and Alessandro and the other.
If you decide to go to Groningen, then we can also make sure that some of our colleagues can show you around.
That would be a very nice experience, I think, for everyone. Okay, do we have other questions from our guests? I see there are also some external people. I'm very, very happy with this. Or other students, otherwise I have two very quick questions. No. Okay. Yeah, then I wanted to ask you something about the doing a step back on the methodology that you have applied and actually developed. It is very interesting how the process works from the governmental guideline that you had already developed going towards the Groningen one. And my question is, how did you actually develop these 10 qualities? Like, how did you choose them? But more importantly, how do you evaluate them in the project? Like once you build it or once you can develop it? Because I understand the spidergram, it is a very interesting tool when you want to do participation, when you want to give like a very quick, impactful view or overview of the project. But is there a, how to say, like a quantitative evaluation on these characteristics? Because I can imagine that working with municipalities or with governmental offices require a certain level of quantitative matter. So in things that are more qualitative than others. So I would like to know what you think about this.
Yeah, good question. So
just a moment. Another in this answer. Do you use AI or not for?
Yeah, so we do use it, but I don't think specifically for this matter at the moment. But yeah, so the 10 dimensions, they were defined because we looked at all policy documents that were made by the municipality and were accepted by the council. And we kind of defined or grouped them into these 10 dimensions. So they're a direct result from policy or current policy. And in the process of the Leidraad, which we did in 2020, so already quite a while ago, it was still very qualitative judgment on how these dimensions were scored. However, we are currently working on making them more quantitative. So for certain aspects, it's much easier to do so. So with climate adaptation or biodiversity, you can make quite clear quantifications. However, with certain things like social interaction, that becomes way more difficult because it is in itself too complex to reduce to just a few numbers, and dealing with that amount of complexity that requires a lot of work. So that is still something that we're busy with, but I don't expect us to have a fully working model in the coming few years. But indeed, it does help to be able to quantify a couple of aspects and to be able to highlight them. But I think we also sometimes have to kind of accept not having quantitative answers for everything. And it has a bit to do with also what Richard Sennett writes in his Buildings and Dwellings, I believe, where we have to kind of accept the open-ended city and not try to kind of define everything in numbers, because then we also kind of lose the complexity of our living environments. Maybe someday we will be able to understand this complexity, but I don't expect that to happen anytime soon.
Yeah, no, indeed, this is kind of the core, I guess, of this dilemma in a way, because we always want to have data to, how to say, prove that what we're doing is working. And some other times you can do just, well, not just, but you can do a qualitative evaluation of things and say, hey, this is what we want to do. Anyway,
maybe to add to that, I think these 10 dimensions are also not so much about the scoring, but more of sending an invitation to the different experts to have a seat at the table, so that at this table you get consensus rather than the seats at the table to only be a designer and a mobility expert, because that's often what happens. And the ecologist is not sitting at the table generally, but the ecologists should also. So getting all of these people at the table already is a step towards a more integrated design rather than this very sectoral approach. So if you can get consensus among those people, it's already a step better.
Yeah, I can imagine this is among the most difficult things, especially if you go towards a governmental process, I guess, because when you have different professionals in-house, then maybe it's a bit easier, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. But how would you involve them in the municipality, at the municipality scales? Like, I guess the Groningen guideline is, as you said, like an invitation, but then what's the step forward? How do you see this passage from the booklets to the project?
Yeah, so a lot of Dutch municipalities, they have their own city ecologist and they have their own water experts. So of these people generally are already in the municipality. However, they're not always invited at the right meetings. So it also kind of helps to promote that. What we do notice sometimes is that certain municipalities, they lack certain expertise, and then we bring them in as external experts. So we often work together with cultural historians, other ecologists, hydrologists, to kind of fill in the gaps within the knowledge of the municipalities.
There is thank you. There is another question. Please. Okay. Just a moment, please.
We build up on the hype for this conference.
Allora, lavorando su un'area industriale, quali sono secondo voi gli elementi chiave da considerare per immaginare un futuro più sostenibile e di attrazione sociale? perché come quest'anno stiamo progettando su un'area industriale matura. Quali sono secondo voi appunto questi elementi chiave da tenere in considerazione durante la nostra fase di progetto?
I didn't fully get everything.
Yeah, maybe it's a more design-oriented question, so I will try to translate for Elan. So she is asking for industrial area. So what are the key points to keep in mind to start an intervention in those specific typologies or area? Because it's a bit different from like the city center or other.
Yeah, so also in the guidebook, we also have a street typology of an industrial area, and we also have a district of an industrial area. So we knew that those were the more complex places to kind of make radical changes, because those are not the most logical places for social interaction or safety. However, at Felixx, we often do work on industrial areas as well. And actually, what we notice a lot in the Netherlands, that industrial areas are built as kind of flat boxes in the landscape. However, if we want to work from a nature-based point of view, we have to concentrate this industrial program much more. That also creates more dynamics in public space. But yeah, price-wise, land value-wise, that is still a very difficult thing to do. We made for Kenning a research on industrial areas for the Netherlands as kind of for the Dutch government. We made this research that they can send to different municipalities that they can use as kind of an inspiration document on how they can treat these industrial areas. But they are not only spatial measures that you take, they're also very planning oriented measures or programmatic measures to take. I think is Mooi Nederland, is it on our website as well?
Not yet, I think.
Okay, because I think that would be an interesting document to see on which levels we can kind of introduce changes in industrial areas. And there we take the three planning layers, which is the landscape layers, the networks layers, and the occupation layer. And each of these layers we can make adjustments to kind of revitalize industrial areas. But yeah, financially it's very difficult to get an incentive to treat them differently. But I think it's a very interesting design challenge.
Yeah, she is mentioning that she's working on a thesis in Matera about an industrial area.
Okay.
So that's what she was asking.
So we need more designers like you working on these areas.
It is actually the course theme for this year. So they are working on an industrial area just outside the city of Matera. So they are all kind of dealing with this big environment, which is in expansion, but also abandoned. You know, you have always these two souls. But this research you're working on, I think, is very interesting. So we're gonna wait when it's gonna be published in your website.
It is already published by the Dutch government, so we can send.
Oh, okay.
So
if it's public, it would be great.
It is Dutch, though, but.
The last question: how many people work into Felixx group? And is a collective or a associated studio? I don't know.
There are 32 people, ranging from urban planners to architects to landscape architects, biologists, so quite diverse. But we are a studio.
Yeah. And there are 3 partners, associate partners.
Yeah.
So this is the structure of the office at the moment.
yeah, but we have the ambition to grow the office, of course. Yeah, so there are 3 founding partners, and as of 2023, 4 associate partners were named. And yeah, I think we grew quite a lot in recent years. So the office is now 11 years old. And I remember the times when it was just 10 people. And at one point, I think we were 35, but the aim is to grow to 40 this year. So.
Is this a hint?
And we have soon our open office day, so you are all invited in Rotterdam. Bianca was there last year.
I was, and I took advantage of a very nice lecture. So, yeah, okay. So I don't want to waste your time further or take your time further. If we have no questions from the class, Prof?
No. And thank you, very all, and especially Bianca. She organized this meet, and I am very happy this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much also from my side, and to everyone who participated, and especially to you too, who gave us your time and knowledge on this topic. And I think I hope we will keep in touch for further collaborations. And yeah, so thank you again. And we're gonna publish this video very soon, so it would be nice to just share it with you and with your network if you want.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Felixx, for your incredible presentation.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.